So yeah, when I first heard the trust theme of fully automated blank, I realized that gives us a lot of space to explore ideas. Some of the other residents are exploring full automation from the perspective of degrowth and acid communism, LARPing as a speculative design practice, and machine intelligence. But we are going to explore it from the idea of agency here today. So what is meant by the idea of full automation? Now, of course, we most closely associate that pair of words with another pair of words, luxury communism, coined by Aaron Bastani, I believe, who in this new book and in his previous work describes fully automated luxury communism as a form of society with greater collective wealth in which all essential wants and creative desires can be satisfied. We're going to rehearse some of the positions of left accelerationism here. So this idea of fully automated luxury communism was picked up and taken further in Nick Cernusek and Alex Williams' Accelerate Manifesto, and in their book, Inventing the Future, pictured above. And this left accelerationism positions itself in opposition to the neoliberal present, which all of us here are likely familiar with on a theoretical as well as a personal level. What has occurred is the progressive elimination of the work-life distinction, with work coming to permeate every aspect of the emerging social factory. This is the left accelerationist position, or the critical theorist position, on the current state of things. They argue that technology and science has been enslaved to capitalist objectives, and this must be reversed, with capitalism subordinated to technoscience as a political project, as imagined, or maybe one example of this could be the famous Chilean governance project, CyberSyn. So this would be a technical system, maybe almost a world computer, through which an economy can be managed and every need provided for. Near the end of Post-Capitalist Desire, which is an important accelerationist text, Mark Fisher said, but can't we conceive of consumer capitalism's culture of ready meals, fast food outlets, anonymous hotels, and disintegrating family life as a dim pre-echo of precisely the social field imagined by early Soviet planners? The Soviet system could not achieve this vision, but perhaps its realization still lies ahead of us, provided that we accept what we are fighting for is not a return to the idiocy of rural life, but the construction of an alternative modernity in which technology, mass production, and impersonal systems of management are deployed as part of a refurbished public sphere.
We're having a problem with the slides.
Oh.
No, it worked now. If you can
Great.
go back into it.
Here are my slide notes.
We're having
Yeah.
an issue again. Should we close down the screen for 5 minutes? It's not the stream. It's just the input. Okay. We're having the input problem.
Okay. Yeah. So this alternative modernity in which technology and mass production and impersonal systems of management are deployed as part of a refurbished public sphere is essentially the left accelerationist vision. And I am strawmanning a bit. I know that there are real accelerationist scholars here tonight. But perhaps you can already imagine what this left accelerationist, this fully automated future looks like. Cross-continent hyperloops powered by solar energy. Advanced simulations like CyberSyn that calculate region-wide supply and demand and adjust production accordingly. Perhaps an automated sharing economy or a universal basic income or leisure time or green cities. But this political ideal of full automation has fallen under critique from multiple directions. From the right, people such as Nick Land critique it on the basis that it's a bit of a self-deceit. Is there really an engine of acceleration and growth beyond capital? And can a self-reinforcing system, a cybernetic system of technocapital, be made beholden to ideological ends? Right accelerationists answer this question in the negative. Others in the sort of Italian anti-capitalist tradition say that the desire for liberation or emancipation that is really important to this idea of full autonomy has always been a part of capitalist claims. Industrialization has pretty much always been represented as leading to some sort of technological destiny that will liberate humans from their worldly limitations. The introduction of newer machines, the stimulation of research to new scientific discoveries and their application within an unending process of technological development, those are the essence of capitalist accumulation. So this idea of liberation is quite crucial to understand because it's a question of agency, what we are able to do under technocapital and what we are able to do without it. And it's this question of agency and automation that I want to explore today and in the rest of this series. The idea is that with full automation, we will no longer be slaves to this system, but masters of it, or at least collaborators with it. In essence, we will gain agency, whereas now we are merely agents of capital. Cernusek and William declare that only a Promethean politics of maximal mastery over society and its environment is capable of either dealing with global platforms or achieving victory over capital. Here's another quote. Towards a time of collective self-mastery and the properly alien future that entails and enables. Towards a completion of the Enlightenment project of self-criticism and self-mastery, rather than its elimination. So here, the desire for full autonomy is a desire of maximal mastery, of pure human autonomy, unconstrained by capital. But what kind of agency would this really be? I've tried to map this out. I've adapted this chart from Vitalik Butrin's taxonomy of blockchain governance projects. Instead, replacing blockchain with these different relationships humans have to technocapital. We can see that automation and humans at the center and edges of any sort of technocapital system are the axes we're working with here. So with humans at the center and the edges of a system, there would be no automation involved. This would be pure manual production, a cottage industry. Whereas automation at the center and the edges would be the holy grail of pure AI. Now, humans at the center and automation at the edges might be tools, but within these larger systems, we should probably associate it with factory line production. It's Taylorism and Fordism. Left accelerationists say that we do not want to return to Fordism, where workers receive security and a basic standard of living in return for a lifetime of stultifying boredom and social repression. Instead, the argument is, let's put automation at the center to create a system that can deterministically create positive outcomes for us. But such a system would only have a concept of humans as a subject that consumes the goods and services that it produces. It would actually, in a way, render humans obsolete or only necessary insofar as we produce demand. And in a sense, that is what capital already is. It's certainly what evolution already is. Evolution being another system which programmatically or automatically executes a certain logic without regards for the individual subjects that are within its purview. And if you understand capital to be an evolutionary system, an evolutionary complex adaptive system, as many modern economists do, then you'll see that capitalism, like evolution, is already something that accelerates, grows, and evolves without any need or regard for humans. It was put in place for the benefit of humans, but its runaway growth, because of its automated nature, is something that we now feel entrapped by. So we are already essentially under a form of full automation, which is out of our hands. As we have seen with this example of left accelerationism, agency is actually one of the underlying questions of our time. And if we want to develop a coherent vision of the future, we should have an understanding of agency and a belief about what kind of agency we should have. This left accelerationist idea of agency, or this agency that we've seen so far, an agency that can be contravened or constrained by capital, but which we may not be able to obtain through full automation, relies on a very specific understanding of what agency is. Firstly, agency is something that humans can actually possess. And to express it, we have to free ourselves of various inhibitions. It's a latent capability that can be expressed as long as we get rid of the things that can hinder agency. And we can see this in like the liberation from work discourse, but also in Western psychology, where we describe our problems as neuroses that hold us back and are to be removed. Even cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is the furthest thing from psychoanalysis, carries on this tradition by identifying harmful mental patterns and motivating their change. This idea of agency also views mankind as the only possessor of agency. Nature is inert, and we reshape it to suit our needs. In our particularly Western view, we tend to see plants and trees and such as essentially inanimate objects, and animals in the behaviorist tradition are viewed as non-thinking automatons which programmatically execute reproduction and consumption functions. And lastly, meaning exists in our minds rather than in things. Meanings are at some level physiological states. This idea of agency relies on the idea that the world is intrinsically meaningless and we create our meanings, which is the core of existentialism and materialism. We're going to talk more about this in a bit. All of these things, each of these things is clearly not just about agency, but about what it means to be human. They define humankind and distinguish humans from other beings and claim us to be agentive, meaning-making entities. And therefore, agency is good. It's something that we should possess, that we're supposed to have, and not having it is bad. All of these elements are captured quite nicely in this quote from philosopher Alain Renaud, who says, fundamentally, humanism is the conception and valorization of humanity in its capacity for autonomy. What constitutes modernity is the fact that man thinks of himself as the source of his representations and acts, as their foundation or their author. The man of humanism is the one who no longer receives his norms and laws either from the nature of things nor from God, but who establishes them himself on the basis of his reason and will. Now, you can see how meanings being located in our minds are quite important to this idea of agency, because it's through our agency that meaning exists at all. Without it, there's nothing. So at this point, I will say that for many years, I've personally had a kind of fixation on agency at quite a personal level. It may have existed longer than this, but the first time I consciously thought about it was when I was in Japan, living in Japan in Tokyo, on New Year's at midnight of 2012, 2013, at Meiji Shrine with hundreds of thousands of other people around me. And I had just gotten an internship, the first job I kind of got by myself after laboring over this email in business Japanese and sending it off and having an extended back and forth. And I got the job, and I was quite exhilarated. And as the new year was ringing in, I found myself thinking the words, by my own will and by my own hand. And it even had this kind of tune to go with it. By my own will, by my own hand. And like this kind of rising crescendoing thing, I can, in retrospect, see acoustically represented the stressful position of responsibility I put myself in with this framing. But I used this framing of agency, this understanding of my own agency, for quite a long time, and it informed my ideas of everything. When I failed to do something that I wanted to do, like start a company or move out of my apartment or finish a project, I felt that it was because I had insufficient willpower. And even with working with a psychologist, many of the things that we discussed were channeled through this framing of things I wanted to do and obstacles to those things, both obstacles inner and outer. I was quite dismissive and unempathetic towards people who I felt couldn't take enough responsibility or didn't show enough willpower to change themselves. And I resented authority, and I needed to feel maximal mastery of my work environment, often leading to conflicts with bosses and the precariousness of self-employment. But maybe some of this will sound familiar to some of you. This egocentric liberal individualism is underpinned by the same concept of agency we've just discussed, the one that's also behind this desire for full automation, exclusive human autonomy. Recently, I've been reading Charles Taylor's book, A Secular Age, partially in preparation for this talk. And this book is, in a way, about how this concept of agency came to rise. Taylor calls it exclusive humanism in an attempt to differentiate it from prior modes of agency. There were a long historical series of developments that led to exclusive humanism that we can't go into today, but the point is that we have not always lived this way. In medieval Europe, for example, we lived with a different type of agency. There was a super agent called God. And God permeated every part of society. God was part of the public sphere of celebration, part of the family, part of every form of social organization. We really couldn't go anywhere without encountering God. The social bond at all of those levels was intertwined in the sacred. And in this world, enchanted by God's presence, meanings were not in the mind. They were in the world. They were imposed on us by demons, angels, spirits, God, and magical objects such as relics like this bone relic of St. Matthew. Meanings were not located in our mental representations. We didn't have a concept of mental representations at all. We just understood that things in the world, when we apprehended them, imported their meaning to us. We didn't believe that we believed in this meaning, or we saw something and then it became a representation of our minds, and that's what gives us power as a symbol. We just directly, the meanings were directly imposed on us. Can you actually imagine what it's like to think that way? It's quite difficult. So objects and spirits and other beings had real causal power, their own agency. And even before this, even further back than medieval Europe, to traditional tribal humans, we have an even more animated world where there's not just one god figure, but many gods, and a sort of animating natural spirit in everything. The world is impregnated with sacredness. The cosmos is a living organism which renews itself periodically. And at that time, in fact, for both of these systems, we naively believed in God or gods. And by naive, I mean we were simply not aware of an option not to. Today, we tend to view this kind of naive belief as hegemonic or a form of suppression. And you might identify that way of thinking as the deconstructive tendency of the postmodern project. But with a little more perspective, we can also see it's an extension of this modern humanist, exclusive humanist liberalism view of agency that I'm throwing into contrast here. If agency is formative to what it means to be human, then surely not having options is a form of suppressing our humanity, right? Religious scholar Mircea Eliade had this to say about this topic. Modern, non-religious man assumes a new existential situation. He regards himself solely as the subject and agent of history, and he refuses all appeal to transcendence. In other words, he accepts no model for humanity outside the human condition as can be seen in various historical situations. Man makes himself, and he only makes himself completely in proportion as he desacralizes himself and the world. The sacred is the prime obstacle to his freedom. He will become himself only when he is totally demysticized. In these forms of society, mankind was at the whim of God and nature. We could die or suffer in any number of ways. We could eat a poisonous berry, we could get bit by a snake, we could get eaten by a bear. God could cause a drought and ruin our crops. And at best, in order to mitigate this, what we could do is pray to God, pray to this other agency, or for traditional man, we could participate through ritual in the regeneration and renewal of the cosmos in an attempt to reinstantiate the natural order. So humans were just one figure in a world of acting agential beings, spirits, and objects. Is that also not a form of full autonomy? Could we also not say that man was living in a fully automated world then, one in which we were not at the center, but at the edges? And this phrase, full autonomy, is rooted in the Marxist traditions that we are exploring, or we explored earlier. And those Marxist traditions also owe themselves to the exclusive humanist version of causality. But what if this desire for full autonomy is not a desire for maximal mastery and total liberation, but the desire for limited agency? The desire to live, again, in a naive state of belief, one in which we are not paralyzed by our optionality, or a desire for a time when humans felt that they had some limited power, but very little in comparison to the rest of the world, which was self-evidently, obviously, tangibly preordained and ordered and populated by living gods. We can see this in a new version of this chart that I just made an hour ago, where instead of systems in which humans interact with technology and capital, it's the same axes, but the non-human agency we're dealing with here is the divine. Oh, wow. I better get those back up there then. Okay, well, I'll go back one slide so I don't spoil it for everybody. The drop. Okay. Yeah? Nope. Huh? No, it's not my computer overheating. It's, yeah, I'm not sure what is going on here. Let's try this. I guess I'll just try playing this. Oh no, is that it? Wow. Okay. All right, this has been the build up to the 2x2 I'm about to drop on y'all. Okay. Yeah, no, I haven't done it yet. All right, so basically, we're building up to the next slide in which, basically I just suggested that, the desire for full autonomy is a desire to actually not be fully autonomous, to be something less than that. And I'm mapping these forms of, these relationships with the divine onto that same chart we saw earlier. So the bottom right, with humans at the center and the edges of this system of belief or this system of agency, we have exclusive humanism, which is what we're quite familiar with as the concept of agency, which sees anything impeding our autonomy as a threat. But with automation, or on the top right, we cede some agency to the order of the sacred, or the animating spirit, the god or gods, and we are at the edges. And if this is the desire for full autonomy, if this is the view of full autonomy that we really desire, then this would help explain the current cultural obsession with the medieval stuff and the revival of magic. Like currently there's this, cultural obsession with neo-feudalism, cults, witches, astrology, magic, etc. And there's this persistent meme, I don't actually know where it comes from, that people turn to magic in times of uncertainty. And the assumption there is that there's a desire for control. But if you look at each of those forms of magic, this control is really an abdication of control. It's a subordination of human control to a higher cosmic logic. But wouldn't it be bad? Wouldn't it be bad to return to that era of magical thinking or animism? Wouldn't we be deceiving ourselves about what's possible if we start talking to trees? We'll probably be depriving ourselves of some agency. Well, if we look at the cutting edge of humanities and physics, there are some cracks in the exclusive humanist version of agency that are starting to show. Some designers in the crowd may be familiar with Gibson's ecological approach to visual perception. Gibson had an idea of affordances. His idea is that the shape of things affords to us what we can do with them. So a bottle that fits in my hand affords its pickup ability. A door handle affords its ability to be pulled. An affordance, Gibson said, is equally a fact of the environment and a fact of behavior. It's both physical and psychical, yet neither. An affordance points both ways, to the environment and to the observer. So Gibson's theory of affordances shows that meaning is not just in our minds, but created in relation to other entities and how they materially are, both animate and inanimate. For instance, a two-humped camel affords the idea of sitting on it. So what a thing is and what it means may not be separate. And the emerging field of biosemiotics takes this idea further and applies it to nature itself. The flower's scent is an affordance of its edibility to a bee. Or, again, with plants, the leaf of a rubber plant is funneled in a way that affords water flow to the base. Water and rain is literally represented in the shape of the leaf. And even with our total environment, if light did not exist, then we would not need eyes. Our eyes afford the presence of light. And the presence of light affords that we need eyes. So these are phenomena that we could call signaling or representation or affordances, but they clearly go beyond this anthropocentric view of representation in symbols. And they capture a relational dynamic of active communication between things, human and inhuman, human and human, inhuman and inhuman, all on a very immediate level, but also on a grand evolutionary scale. Now, this is where you might wonder, are we not just anthropomorphizing these things like this rubber plant? Are we giving it human qualities that it shouldn't have by saying, it's signaling or representing water in the shape of its leaf? Theoretical physicist Karen Barad, and also a feminist theorist, has been trying to create a non-representationalist account, a material account of agency and phenomena that help explain this. And her argument, okay, I'm good. Definitely think I have to pull this out now. Yeah. I'm getting good at that. Yeah, her argument, Karen Barad's argument, expands on the famous double slit experiment, which is quite famous in quantum physics. And we know that it basically shows that we know light exhibits wave-like behavior because if we shoot it through two slits like this, we get that diffraction pattern, which is exactly what happens when we send a wave of water through two slits. But if we set up a measuring device to see which actual photons of light are going through the two slits, then it will behave as if we're just firing individual photons, and we get two single lines. And this can't be explained within classical physics because it suggests that there is no external objective referent, but the light is actually interacting with the whole apparatus, including the observing element. And this makes it quite difficult to specify what the true nature of light is. And Karen Barad, following Niels Bohr, argues that what this actually means is that there are no independently existing objects with inherent characteristics. Things exist only in relation to one another. So this idea of agency as a quality that we have, and of human autonomy and separateness, and of liberal individualism may not be that solid. And what's coming here is a different definition of the world in which we don't have to make our own meanings. Agency as not a quality that we possess, but something that exists in relation, where actions are always interactions or intra-actions. It suggests that all things are agentive as they behave and exist in relation with other beings. And finally, it suggests that meanings objectively exist, not in our minds, but in the relation between material things, including but not limited to minds. So in this, is there also not the possibility for a different understanding of objects and beings? Can we not hear what things tell us as a legitimate category of experience? From this perspective, it's rather impossible to look at objects or animals as dead and lifeless, or animals and plants as computer programs deterministically executing functions. In this view, they are actually safe to impose their meanings on us once again. And we are not expected to be the sole agents of responsibility because our agency and our constraints are always a factor of our environment, events, all the things in it. This takes us away from the atomic worldview, which underpins classical Newtonian physics, in which the world is viewed as made up of aggregates of discrete entities in the void. But it also upsets the atomistic view of humans. We tend to view humans as individual actors, and relationships as something that exists within these individual actors, or exists between them, and the social contract as an abstract agreement between individuals. Anthropologists who study tribal humans have created this concept of the dividual, not the individual, who is a unit set against a whole, but a dividual, a person who is made up of a composite of relationships, or put another way, who personifies relations. The Nakaya tribe in South India, for example, have social interactions and relations with trees, rocks, hills, elephants. And this is not because they a priori consider them to be persons. It's because they maintain relationships with these entities, like they make them relatives by sharing the world with them. For example, they see these particular elements are devaru, or persons, as they walked harmlessly and looked straight into their eyes. That is, when they responsively relate to the Nakaya people. This gives us quite a different view of what agency can be. With regards to our humanity, agency could be not in our individuality or our liberation from relations that hold us back, but through our individuality, our existence as made up of relations. In causality or ontology, really, of the physical world. We've seen agency not as one thing acting on another, but the interrelation between all things in a given phenomena, including and folding in the observer. In psychology, this suggests the idea not of agency as a liberation from our neuroses, but working with them and preferencelessly holding and learning from negative feelings. And with regards to the self, agency not as increasing amounts of total responsibility, but the ability to share and remake responsibility with others. Agency perhaps is a form of vulnerability. Obviously, we can't just go back to animism because we no longer have that naivety. We no longer exist in an optionless world. We can't just return to that. So instead, we're going to need to find a form that allows us to maintain our sense of individuality, but also our relationality. And in the rest of this series, we're going to be talking about agency more. And Arthur mentioned this, but in 2 weeks, my colleague Darren will be speaking about agency in ways that scale with permaculture and technology companies. And we're going to hear from a few guests after that, working and thinking across different fields about agency in their lives and work. And in the final event, we're going to talk about the most personal level, about suffering, and about this tension between individuality and the collective, and the specific demands of our time. We humans live with an illusion of control. We are living in a world of unconstrained intelligence and agency and animate capability, which we refuse to perceive as meaningfully alive. Yet we are also obsessed with the creation of an artificial entity with general intelligence that mimics the form of agency we mistakenly believe we have. That we keep moving the goalposts for AI is an indictment of our ability to perceive causal power where it actually is. Now, where unconditional accelerationists are right is that they acknowledge the existence of non-human entities with their own agency, affordances, and goals. Why not view capitalism as a leviathan or as a Lovecraftian old god? Maybe that makes our condition more livable. One more time, let's turn to traditional animistic cultures. What happened when things went bad in animistic cultures? When things went wrong, our solution was to ritually recreate the foundation of the cosmos, the separation of earth from water, and to begin time again. In this way, traditional man was always close to a sacred time beyond the everyday. For them, their labor was only repetition of a primordial act, the transformation of chaos into cosmos by the divine act of creation. When they tilled the desert soil, they were in fact repeating the act of the gods who had organized chaos by giving it structure, forms, and norms. Whether it's a case of healing or clearing uncultivated ground or conquering and occupying a territory inhabited by other human beings, ritual taking possession, it must always repeat the cosmogony, the creation of the cosmos from chaos. The world is regenerated each time the archetypal actions of the gods are imitated. Our current definition of agency and our understanding of ourselves constitute a finite game, a long game, played over many thousands of years, yes, but nevertheless, a game with an obvious conclusion. The telos of this game is to be history's final agent, the only being left when it's all over. And the consequences of this game are both a deprecation of the past and a foreclosure of the future. It locks us into a present that refuses to pass, metal and plastic stacking up until our history abruptly and painfully ends. To change, decelerating this accumulation, and instead allowing for the acceleration of entropy, we must move towards an infinite game in which we too are constantly regenerating time. Thank you. In lieu of question and answer, we're going to have a roundtable discussion about agency now together. So we have set up some tables and chairs around in a circle up there, and if you want to go up and sit around, feel free to grab a beer out of the fridge on the way, and then we'll all talk about this together.